On this slide, we're going to talk about some of the broad attributes, but then deep dive into each one of these segmented areas. So first, we're going to talk here about the royal blue area, which has the attributes of being very entrepreneurial, having that high risk and high reward. And these are the firms that you've heard about. When students come to me, they've heard the brand names that exist inside this quadrant. I'm going to talk for a second about wirehouse firms. These tend to be some of the older firms in financial services. Some examples you may have heard of would be a Merrill Lynch, a Morgan Stanley, a UBS, or a Wells Fargo. These are household brand names that are much larger. They offer full service brokerage, oftentimes as both a broker and a dealer, and have nationwide wealth management. They produce research, utilize trading, all sorts of different investment banking. And so it's a very wide path in a lot of ways. For a student entering into this segment of the industry, there'd be some series license that they need to pass, the Series 7, the Series 63, which would allow them to give advice and sell particular products. This quadrant traditionally does fall under the suitability standard and allows for transaction-based compensation. Again, large brand recognition would, if you were going to work in one of these firms, it would have a large brand recognition or a big name behind it. And then lastly, from a client standpoint, clients are traditionally viewed as owned by the firm rather than the individual advisor.
All right, so your next element, you're looking at proper casualty multi-line agencies. You're looking at the State Farms of the world, the Allstate of the world, that wind up getting more and more into financial planning, right? Where historically firms like Country have been, auto and homeowners. Now they're getting more comprehensive in what you're doing. So PNC, multi-line agency, really has those attributes. You do have some high risk, high reward on entry. You do have the big name recognition. But more and more of these firms are getting into the financial planning space. They're providing more holistic services. And so, from that end, something Nathan said earlier is there are more and more touch points around the circle. And historically, having been thought of as maybe a auto company, we're seeing more evolution into saying, well, wait, I'll talk to you about money. I'll talk to you about retirement. I'll talk to you about your holistic goals as well. So we're starting to see more opportunities here for students. We're starting to see home office opportunities, certainly, for financial planning students in these roles, and also a couple that may be a really good fit. You generally are looking more at middle market families and middle market clients. So that changes the distribution a little bit from some of the higher end touch points on the circle. In middle market, then you're going to have more volume, more auto insurance policies, more homeowners insurance policies to work with on that front. So a little more high touch as far as frequency of touch. But these opportunities on a corporate level can be very attractive, right? If a auto company is going to start doing some investments or wealth management, they're going to hire some CFPs and CFAs at the home office to help guide that. And so we see opportunity on that front, quite a bit of it.
A couple things I'd like to add there. The beauty of the PNC pathway is the compulsory clients, that people are required to have insurance on their home. People are required to have insurance on their car. So you already have a lot of compulsory clients. And then you just ask them, could I help you with your investments, with your retirement account? You've already got the relationship. If they say no, you still are getting paid off of the compulsory component. So they would like you to build the book of business, but if you aren't great at building it, you still are getting paid for your work and your time. And I have some students from New Jersey that went and are running State Farm offices, and they're making over six figures, and they're able to reach communities that have been traditionally underserved. They can get into, if you have students that are looking to be in a certain rural spot.
Yeah, so the next area that we often will place students is the life and disability insurance area. And this is a historic part of the financial services industry. These are the massive firms, once again, you see on TV, the Northwestern Mutuals, the New York Life. Offices all over the country provide a lot of opportunities for students, no matter where they want to go. These firms typically will focus on insurance first. Life and disability insurance is sort of their bread and butter. Oftentimes there's annuities that are a part of that. And typically they evolve into financial planning. So you do see financial planning services offered at these firms. Typically they do lead with insurance first, but you can get full financial planning at these locations. This is definitely a place where you can talk about entrepreneurship and high risk, high reward. Typically, there is significant attrition. If you go back in time, maybe it's been 10% of advisors that have entered into these firms and have made it. And that's because it is really hard to enter this world as anything but a producer. We're seeing more teams that are starting, but typically speaking, this is going to be for the individual that wants to grow out, build their own book and build their own firm. But let me highlight a little bit about the high risk, high reward component of that. We had an individual from one of these firms on campus yesterday, and I was talking to him about compensation structure. And one of the things he shared with me is, now this is an established advisor, so he's sort of at the higher end of the scales. But he said of the income, of the revenue that he produces, 87% flows back to him. Out of that, he does have to pay for the employees that work for him, but his take home is roughly 60% of the revenue that he's generating. As we go over and we talk about some of the other firms, for example, an RIA, typically payout rates are more in the 18 to 30%. So that really highlights the high risk, high reward aspect of this. It's harder to make it, but if you make it and you make it well, you do keep significantly more income, significantly higher income potential.
And just to kind of add, we've had some conversations lately with some of the well-known mutuals in the space. And I think this might be a segment that is listening that kind of gets it as far as student career paths, that perhaps, there are students that are, again, very interested and don't get in my way. I want to work 80 hours and I want to make, the life that I want. By the time I'm 35, I'm going to be a millionaire. There are lots of students like that. But I think you're starting to actually see some more of the residency models, some home office support models. The one or two high performing advisors might say, hey, we don't have time to get the CFP. We don't want the CFP, but tell you what, we value it. And we'd like to have someone on our staff with it who can help with our planning. So we're starting to see a little more opportunity there in a non-traditional entry point space within life and disability. I think it's kind of an interesting evolution that's happening on that front.
I guess lastly, to close out this particular area, and again, notice that we're moving from the royal blue over to the turquoise area. We have franchises, which are independent, also known as independent broker dealers. This, whenever I explain this section to students, it's one of the hardest areas to explain because it's sort of a catch-all. It has a lot of groups inside of it. Some people refer to this segment or area as hybrid firms that can be both have an RIA and a brokerage side simultaneously. So it becomes a little bit difficult to explain this area. I would tell you this could be a firm like Ameriprise. They'll have their P2s, which are their independents, or Edward Jones, LPL, Raymond James would be some examples of a fit inside of this grouping. The services are somewhat similar to a full service broker, talking about wirehouse firms. However, they are paid as independent contractors, so they're not employees of the wirehouse firm. Many of them are duly registered, as I mentioned earlier, and their business typically would have their name on it. So you would see a firm, a Raymond James firm at the bottom, but it would typically have the person's name, the business owner's name. They would brand it around their name instead of the name of the firm. Clients inside of this grouping, which is a little bit different than the wirehouse model, are viewed as clients of the advisor rather than clients of the firm. So movement within and maybe flexibility within the architecture of these particular teams is a little bit more open. However, the brand recognition, the counter to that is the brand recognition is going to be a little bit lower. When it's your name versus a name that's been around 100 years on the door, the brand recognition is a little bit lower in this particular quadrant.
So I think that wraps up a discussion of the royal blue segment. Again, the entrepreneur style segment, and just kind of talking about some of the complexities there.
Before you end that, Craig, I'd like to add a lot of the franchises are starting to offer a 4-year salary to get students and new professionals started before they transition to getting paid from their own book of business. So it gives them a nice platform to get started from and a lot of training, and it also allows them to get into rural areas where they, even if they're from small town Illinois, they could end up starting a firm there.
Couldn't agree more. And we're starting to see that too. And I think it's good. It's kind of a getting with the future of where we're headed.